Yeah, Susanna's jamming out. Okay, lovely to have everybody here tonight. So, welcome to Nova Scribes. My name is Brian. Tonight we have Amy Climer. I'm really, really excited to have her. So, let's kick off with a couple of questions. Do you want sharper, more human conversations in your sessions? And could your groups benefit from visual metaphors that make abstract concepts concrete? So, if you have answered yes to those questions, you are in the right place. Our presenter, Dr. Amy Climer, is an innovation consultant, a TEDx speaker, and an award-winning author. She collaborates with forward-thinking organizations, including the Mayo Clinic, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and Fox Sports. Dr. Amy Climer is also the creator of Climer Cards, the watercolor image decks, which we will be using today. They've been used in over 60 countries to spark ideas, deepen dialogue, so that teams can become clearer, more honest, and more human. Amy is a maker at heart. When she's not facilitated, she can be found building something in her woodshed or paddling a river in western North Carolina. Nova Scribes, please help me welcome Dr. Amy Climer. Amy, it's over to you. Lovely to have you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Hi, everyone. Good to see you. Good to see some familiar faces and some people I haven't met yet. All right, so today we are going to be digging into this tool that I created a while ago called Climer Cards, and it's really about how to deepen engagement and conversations using metaphors. And today, I think, everybody here is a facilitator or trainer or some variation of that. So we're really focusing in on, the whatever programs and workshops you lead, and really looking at how to make them more interactive, engaging, experiential, more meaningful. Um, this is not like how to lead a bunch of icebreakers that everyone rolls their eyes at. Um, so if you don't already, I would highly recommend grabbing some pen and paper so you can jot down some notes. I mean, this almost feels silly to say to this group because I know all of you are already scribing away, but I know I'm someone who will forget what I learned or forget ideas I had if I'm not writing it down. So. All right, I want to know who's here. So in the chat, if you could all in one response put two things. Where are you in the world? I just love hearing that. And then what type of groups or programs do you facilitate? So what kind of topic or age or yeah, give us a little context. So throw that in the chat. I'd love to just love to know who's here and what you all do. All right. And once you've put your response in, feel free to read the other ones. Cool. We've got some US folks in Virginia and Arizona, Victoria, British Columbia, up in Canada. Looks like you all are doing some strategic planning, team building, leadership development, nonprofits. Sherry's in the Boston area. Awesome. All right. Very good. If you're still finding your chat for today, maybe you're multitasking, feel free to put in the chat. It's pronounced Boston. You're right, Brian. Boston. I should know that. I used to live up near there. Did my master's at UNH, so not too far. We have Christina joining us all the way from Mexico. So happy you're here. All right, cool. Super helpful. I'm going to try as we go to like reference those contexts that you're working in. We have a small group today. So y'all, if you have a question or you want to interrupt, I mean, literally feel free to just unmute and interrupt me as we go. All right, but we're going to start off with I want to ask you all a question. We're going to just put this in the chat. So I'm curious if you've ever used Climer cards before. I know there's might be a range of exposure or experience. So throw in the chat yes or no. Is it like that you've used the physical versions, the virtual versions? You have no idea what Climer cards are? Anyway, can you just throw that in the chat? I'm curious. Okay, we have never, yes, not yet, yes. Some people have used the physical, some both physical and virtual. Susanna says she loves them so much. Okay, y'all, I just got to interrupt and share a story about Susanna from last week. So last week I was down in Mexico. I just told Brian the story before y'all got on. And uh, I, I was down there for the International Association of Facilitators conference, which I had never been to before. And I got there a day early, and then I was traveling with a friend, and that the next morning she wasn't feeling so great. And so I went out by myself to just find her some bananas and I walk out of the hotel. I'm on a sidewalk in Mexico. I know nobody in this city except my friend who's sick in the hotel. And then Susanna stops me and says, "Are you Amy Clymer?"
Yes.
I'm like, "What is going
Yeah,
on?"
I just empty them out.
And then turns out she's a Climer card user, so that was a really fun moment. So thank you, Susanna. That was just like I really enjoyed that. All right, so this is good to see kind of what you all like your background about Climber cards. Let's use them. We're gonna play with them right now. I think that's the best way to understand what they are. So here's what's gonna happen. Let me 1 second here. I am going to, in a moment, once I find the right screen, sorry. Okay, not yet, but in a moment, we'll put a link in the chat. And when you click on the link, you're going to see this screen that's on my video feed here. And you'll see the question that says, select a card that represents something you want to improve in your facilitations or trainings. You'll scroll down, there's about 50 different images. Click on one of them, type in your name, just first name is fine, doesn't matter, and then why you chose this card. And then once you've put that in, you can hit create response and you'll be able to see everyone else's response as well. So again, you're picking a card that represents something you want to improve in your facilitations or trainings. All right, Brian's going to throw that link in the chat right now. So throw that link in the chat, Brian, for the Climer cards. He's on it. There it is. So click on that link. Oh, and also I'll put a QR code up on my screen if you want to use a different device. Like if you want to use your phone or something, feel free to use that QR code.
Ah,
Those of you with your video feed on, can you just give me a thumbs up if the things are working on your end? Okay, cool. Thank you, Wendy. Thanks, Susanna. Welcome, Beth. We're going to drop a link in the chat again. And what we're doing right now is just once you go to the link, you can select a card that represents something you want to improve in your facilitations or trainings. And then you'll click on that image and make your response. Or you can use the QR code. I love responses are coming in. These are great. So good. Yeah, once you've responded, feel free to read the other responses. And in a moment, we're going to go into breakout rooms. So let me give you those directions. If you're still writing, please continue. All right, so in a moment, we're going to go into breakout rooms. When you're in there, please share your name with each other, if you want to share who you work with and what you do, you kind of already put that in the chat. But most important, I want you to spend time talking about which image you selected and why. And so just take 1 minute each. And if you in Zoom, there's a Zoom timer on the screen. And so watch that timer because you could answer this question in 15 seconds. So fill the minute, but be conscious not to fill more than a minute. And once you get in your room, please share in alphabetical order. So you're gonna have about 3 people in your room, I think. So we'll see you back here in 5 minutes. If you finished, everyone's shared, feel free to just keep talking about the concepts that came up in your sharing.
okay, here we go.
Welcome back. Welcome back. How are your conversations? I see thumbs up, big smiles. Cool. Do we have everybody? Maybe a couple bailed because they didn't want to talk to people. We'll try not to take that personal. Um, oh, no, they're coming back. Okay, cool. Awesome. All right, I think everyone's back. Okay, so I want you to think about that conversation you had and how did Climber Cards change your conversation? So don't want to hear a repeat of what you talked about, but what you to get a little meta and think about the conversation and how did Climber Cards impact the conversation? So I'd love to just open it up. You can unmute yourself. You can raise your physical hand like Brian just did, your virtual hand. If you don't want to talk, you can throw a comment in the chat. But yeah, what did you think? How did Climber Cards change your conversation?
Wendy, you want to go first?
Sure. Hi. It just gave us an anchor. So like oftentimes when you go into small groups, everybody kind of stands there and looks at each other. And both the cards themselves gave us something to react to, respond to, share out. And also just like the specificity of your instructions. You were like, there's a timer. Everyone's gonna go for 1 minute. Take the whole minute. Like not to minimize those things either. But yeah, I think an anchor is really nice.
Awesome. You're a true facilitator to comment on the direction. So that's awesome. Sherry.
It it added humor
Mm,
Yeah.
and brought us, gave us something to come back to when we started meandering,
yes, and I was in Sherry's group, and yes, both those things. We did meander for a bit.
which I also love, but
Cool. Stephen.
It gave us analogies
Mm.
to work from.
And how did that help, like having those analogies?
So one of our people used a carnival and talking about the craziness of the carnival and the excitement and the fun, and we were able to relate that
Mm.
to what she was talking about, and we were so yeah, we all had kind of a frame of reference, like we've said, a frame of reference to talk from.
Yeah, I love it. Nice. Any other comments on how Climber cards change your conversation? I think just want to yes and what you all said. Like they provide this anchor, they allow this like specificity. I mean, Wendy, maybe you were talking about the directions, but I do think they allow us to get more specific in our responses because this is one of those questions you could have talked about for 15 minutes and meandered all over the place. And so it's just like, all right, we're going to focus in here. And then what Steven said, those analogies, those metaphors, there's something about metaphors that help us communicate faster and they speed up the conversation in essence. And that's really what the power of Climber cards is the metaphor and how metaphors work. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. I wanted to share just for those of you that appreciate an origin story, just how Climber cards started and why I decided to make these. So a number of years ago, like maybe 20, let's see, I published these in 2012. So it's probably like 2011, 2010. I was facilitating, I did a lot of team building back then. And I work with teams now, but it looks very different. But anyway, I was doing this activity, actually the activity on the screen, it's called Keep Bunch. That's not so important. But I was working with this group of women. They were all women in the trades. And I set them up on this activity and y'all, it was awful. Like they were just arguing and fighting with each other. And we eventually got through it. And then during the debrief, we started talking about it and it just kind of felt a little surface level because there was a lot to unpack if they were willing to. And so I had drawn these deck of cards. I didn't even think of them as a deck of cards, but I'd drawn these images, I laminated it, and I laid them out on the ground. And I said, pick a card that represents your behavior in this activity. And it shifted everything. And people started sharing more specifically. One person I particularly remember said, this is the way I showed up here is not who I am, and it's not who I want to be. And she started crying. And as soon as she said that, it just was this beautiful snowball effect, and other people started sharing. So we had this great conversation. And so we wrap up and we're like walking over to the next activity. We were outside. And as we're walking over, a friend of mine named Sarah, she was the organizer of this group. And she said, Amy, these cards are really cool. Have you ever thought about doing something with them? And I was like, what do you mean? And so she's the one who really pushed me, like, yeah, you could like, other people would want these. You could make these. I'm like, oh, really? And I just had made them for myself because I couldn't find anything like them that I liked. There were some other products out there, but they didn't really speak to me. So anyway, I that sort of kicked things off, and I eventually posted them as a Kickstarter campaign, which back in 2012, Kickstarter was pretty young, and that was a really cool experience. I thought that I would print these initial 500 decks for the people who responded to the campaign, and then it was just going to be like a one-off project. And then I sold those decks, and then people kept ordering them. And I was like, oh, okay. And then what surprised me more is that every year I end up selling more than the previous year. And again, I thought this would be a short-term thing, and it just seems to be continuing. So at this point, I'm very proud to say they have been in 60 plus countries. And actually, as of last week, obviously I'm keeping this map, and I need to add Serbia and Barbados to the map thanks to the International Association of Facilitators conference last week. So and to me, this is really important that they've been used around the world because that says to me they work cross-culturally. And I was trying to think about that when I designed them, is that I wanted images that were not, US centric or English centric. And the response I've gotten is that I've hit that mark. So, and that was actually there were some other decks out there that didn't meet that criteria for me, which was part of my motivation. But let's talk about, so that's a bit of the background, but let's talk about how they work and what's going on. You all know all about visuals and how powerful they can be. So let's talk about metaphors. And just a little jog your memory back to, when you were 10 years old learning about metaphors. A metaphor is a comparison between two things that are not alike, but have something in common. And they can, like I said, they can be really powerful. They can help us shortcut conversation, but they also can fail at times. So a mentor of mine, his name is Michael Gass. He actually wrote 2 books about the power of metaphors. And in volume 2, he wrote this, that a picture can be worth 1,000 words. If a picture can be worth 1,000 words, then one experience can be worth 1,000 pictures. And if an experience can be worth 1,000 pictures, then one metaphor can be worth 1,000 experiences. That to me is really cool. And I think, Stephen, you commented about the carnival and the chaos of it. It's like, yeah, we can all picture that and we can see that. And it helps us, speed up our association with whatever that person is saying. But there's a problem when we are using metaphors because they don't always work. If someone has never been to a carnival or a fair or doesn't know what that means, then it might not make sense. So a metaphor only has value when it's able to interpret the right experience in a manner that provides the right picture, that produces the right words that have deep meaning for that particular person. And this is where I feel like as facilitators and trainers and coaches, sometimes we fail. And that sometimes we use metaphors that make a lot of sense to us, but they don't make a lot of sense to our participants. A number of years ago, I was early in my consulting practice, and I felt like I needed a coach, a business coach. And I went out to coffee with this guy who I was considering hiring, and he's telling me all these things he can do for me, and I'm kind of on board listening, and then he launches into this metaphor about baseball. And I grew up in the US. I know the basics of baseball. I've been to a game or two. But this was like detailed. You had to like know baseball really well. I had no idea what he was talking about. And I actually understood him more before he started using the metaphor. And then I was just completely lost. And I thought, no, I'm not hiring this guy to work with me. Forget it. And I've thought about that conversation many times. I thought, what if he had like put out some images and said, hey, what's a metaphor from what I just talked about? Do any of these images sound like what I said? Or what if he asked me to come up with a metaphor? Or even if he asked me if I knew how to play baseball? And I think sometimes as facilitators and trainers, we bring metaphors to our groups and we don't always check it to see if they understand them. Sometimes the metaphors we bring are really powerful and they work really well. So I'm not suggesting don't bring metaphors. Sorry, I keep mentioning this IAF conference I was at last week because it was so recent, but one of the keynote speakers shared a metaphor about the iceberg, like you can just see a little bit of the iceberg above water and there was a bunch below the water. And I was thinking, probably not that many people in this room have actually seen an iceberg in real life. But I think we've heard enough about this iceberg metaphor that we kind of get it. And I think she unpacked it a little bit. So if you're going to share metaphor, anyway, this is a side note, make sure you unpack it and you explain it if you think people might not get it. But what's cool about Climer cards is people just make their own metaphor, right? And it's so much easier and more powerful if they're doing that. So let's talk about how to use these. It's super simple. Before I go on, though, yeah, Brian, I'm with you. Sports metaphors drive me nuts too, because I think sports are this very unique context that the rest of us don't live in. But any questions right now before we move on, or any comments anyone wants to make? No? All right.
I was just going to share a story with you real quick. I was I was teaching a telecommunications class in Alaska, and one of the things I like to do in my class is talk about how packets are like cars traveling on the highway, and talking about you can give them priority and think of it like a funeral. In a funeral, you have the police that go up to the intersection, block the traffic, and all the cars are packets with their headlights on, so everybody knows they follow along. But nobody understood that because they don't bury people after the funeral. They wait until June or July when the ground thaws out. And I didn't know this. So my metaphor fell apart and it became my favorite story of metaphors not working.
I love it. Thank you, Steven, for sharing. I thought you were going to say that it didn't work because they don't have highways big enough to need blocking traffic, which in parts of Alaska probably would be true too. Um, that's great. It's a good story. Uh, all right. Any other comments right now? Cool. Okay, so let's look at how these work. If you've used Climer cards, you already know this, but it's all about the prompt that you pose. So today I asked you to pick a card that represents something you want to improve in your facilitation. You could use anything here. I have not come up with a topic yet or heard of a topic that wouldn't work. It's all about just, wording it in a way that makes sense for the context. So here's a few. I'm going to put this up on the screen. Let me hide my head here. So pick a card that represents your definition of whatever you want. So if you look back at the content that you all teach, so, Sarah, you could do something, pick a card that represents your definition of leadership. Just something that simple and basic could end up being really powerful. One of a very memorable moment was starting off a 2-day conflict class on pick a card that represents your definition of conflict. And it was fascinating. What one person thought was conflict, another person never occurred to them that that would be considered conflict. So it's very interesting. But I also use this a lot in teams, like pick a card that represents, like this last one, who you are in our team. And that can be very revealing. I love just for me personally and the kind of work that I do, I love ones that are, try to get a little edgy if I can. Not as an opener or anything, but eventually trying to get there. Um, I love it. Brian's put all of these in the chat for us. So I want you to take a moment and given your context, put in the chat your own, like what's a prompt that you might use? So pick a card that represents, and you can just write dot, 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 and then your response, because we all know that'll be the beginning. So throw in the chat, what's a prompt you might use? Hmm. Oh yeah, I love them. They're coming in. Wendy says, pick a card that represents how you want to show up today as an individual. Yeah, I love that, especially as an opening. That could be, yeah, I was gonna say it could be a good question for the beginning of a coaching session, but maybe as a coaching session, how do you want to show up at X? Maybe not that. Yeah. Um, Pick a card. Sherry says, pick a card that represents an aspiration for your organization. Yeah. That tells the story of getting here today, what success looks like for our time together, that reminds you of your remote work at home. Love it. Yeah, I mean, you kind of can see like these are all really quite different, and you can come up with whatever you want. I think one thing to think about as you're leading a group is that at the beginning of a session, especially if the group is newer with each other or maybe at least newer to you, start it off easy, don't give a big doozy right off. But start off with like a lower risk question. And then maybe the middle or the end, you might consider something that's a little bit higher risk or it could be a little more revealing. Most of you know that if you're familiar with kind of facilitation process. All right, any questions on just like how to pick a prompt or that kind of thing? Okay. Um, I realized just to be extra explicit, so what we used today was the virtual version. Um, there's also physical decks. The deck we used today was actually Climer Cards 2. I'll share these more in a few minutes, but there's two physical decks and they're just physical cards. They look like this. So they're the same size as a deck of playing cards. There's 52 in a deck, just like a deck of playing cards. So if you're doing this in person, you would just spread them all out on a table or on the floor and then ask the question. Um, all right, let's talk about a little bit more about the decks in case you're curious and some options. Uh, okay, so I just mentioned this. There's in-person, virtual. The virtual ones you can use in person if you think everybody will have like a smart device, whatever, iPhone or a computer or whatever, because you could just put a QR code up on the screen. I have done that, and it is kind of cool because then you can project everybody's response up on the screen. I will say one downside that I'm hoping to fix is if there's a really big group, it'll go really slow. So if you have a big group, say 100, 200 people, then you might want to do it right before a break and tell people, hey, sometime over the next 15 minutes, please respond and then you can get your responses after the break because it just times out a bit. But let's see. This is the first deck. This is the original deck that I created. This is some of the images. These were all watercolor paintings that I did. And then 11 years later, okay. So this is one side of the deck. This is the other side, the flip side of that deck. Um, Brian, I'm gonna let Liz in because I know her. You don't need to.
I'm glad you know her because she's
Okay.
not registered.
Oh, okay. Um, so Climber, this is the flip side, and you'll see there's different numbers, shapes, and colors. And this is a way to take a bigger group and sort them into smaller groups. So you could say, hey, find your same shape or find your same color, and then that would, that's how you mix them up. Or sometimes I'll just say, find a partner where your numbers add up to greater than 10 or greater than 20, and that works really well. So that's the flip side. 11 years later, I made Climer Cards 2, and this was kind of fun because at this point there was a nice like community, some volume of people who were had used them, and so I was able to do some crowdsourcing and say, all right, you've seen this deck, you've used it a bunch. What images do you want? And so I collected some ideas, and a few of the images were from those crowdsourcing. Um, and I also like to say I became a better painter between 2012 and 2023. So the images have a little bit of a different feel. And then there was a request, which this picture doesn't show them great, but there was a request from some people to have like some darker images. They felt like the first deck was maybe a little too happy and cheerful. So there's a few in there that are a little darker, I guess, or that could be interpreted that way. On the flip side of this deck, there are emotion words, and all the words are in English, Spanish, and French.
Hmm.
In the virtual version, which we'll actually do this in a minute, there are 5 languages available, and you can pick whichever language is the biggest, and then the other 4 in the corner. So English, Spanish, French, German, and Italian. And the German is because my assistant speaks German. The Italian is because somebody was on one of these webinars and said, "Hey, do you want an Italian version? I'll translate for you." I was like, "Yes." So if anyone knows another language they want to translate for me, I'm all in. I will upload it to the virtual version. So also within the virtual version of Climer Cards, there are some more decks within the platform. So I'll just quickly show those to you, and then you can go in and play if you want. Because if you sign up, you get free 30 days, and it's easy, plenty of time to play. Okay, so one of the decks is this. It's literally only 3 cards that look like this traffic light, and it's an excellent deck to use as a closing, where you might say something like, given what you've learned today, what is something you want to stop, continue, or start doing? And then people can pick either one or more than one. And that's been really enlightening to me, because you know how it is sometimes as a facilitator, like you don't really know what's going on in people's heads. And then you're like, oh, well, okay, they are getting something out of it. This is cool. And then there's this deck called People in Tech, and these are all images related to either people or technology. I actually made this initially for a client. It was some subset of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and we were looking at aviation security. So anyway, I made this deck for them, but it's now available to everybody. And then there's also 2 decks from other people. This is, who knows Chad Littlefield? Anyone? Okay, a couple people, one person. So this is Chad's We Connect deck, and they're all like thoughtful, sort of get to know you type questions. And so good for a group where you just want to have some conversation. And then this is a deck by a psychotherapist who lives here where I do, which is in Asheville, North Carolina. And he created this model of these 7 different categories that anytime we're making change in our life, he kind of narrowed it down that it falls pretty much into one of these categories. And then each category there's 7 different questions, just thought-provoking questions. This is a really great deck if you're a coach or want to do any one-on-one work, but it could also work with a group as well. All right, any questions or comments there? I was going to give you like a 4-minute tour behind the scenes if you want it. Would that be helpful? Okay, cool. Okay, so here we are in the session we just did. I'm going to exit this session, which does take a second. Okay, and so then when you first open up the document or open up the app, you're in the dashboard, which it does take a second. I'm sorry, the back end of this is a little bit slow. However, even though I have figured out that I can set up an entire session in less than 45 seconds, I've timed myself. Once you learn how to do it, it's really quick. So, all right, so when you first come in, this is what it looks like. And I almost always just click right over here to my sessions, unless I'm going to be using one of these recent ones. But I go over to my sessions if I want to create a new session. So once I click on that, you'll see up in the right corner, it says create new session. I click on that, and then you need to name your session. Whatever you name it becomes the unique link, like becomes the URL, although you can change it. But let's just call this Scribes Practice. And then if I tab, it automatically adds that to the URL. You can see this will become the whole URL. Now, you can change this. So if you want to edit that, maybe you just want to say Scribes 2026, whatever you want. The only limitation, I think it has to have like at least 5 characters, but it also can't be a link that someone else has used. Now, I have never once run into that problem. So, but if you do, you just change a letter or something. You can write a description if you want. The only place this description shows up is in a PDF report that you can produce. And then you have some questions that are very important to ask. Maybe the most important one is this top question is, will you be using this with minors under the age of 16? If so, please toggle that on because it'll prevent most people from typing their full name because when you go to type your name in, it limits you to 5 characters. And so I suppose there's someone that could technically have a 5-character full first and last name, but unlikely. But then also when you archive the session, it strips out the entire name and just keeps the first letter. So I don't know that anyone mentioned they were working with youth, but the next thing is, do you want to allow groups to access the session anytime, or do you want to require that you as the facilitator are logged in so they can access it? I almost always choose that because usually I'm doing this live with groups, but you could also set it up as like pre-work or post-work for groups, which could be kind of cool. If you have an organization account, you can have that. And then these last 3, 2 of the decks are double-sided. One of them was Michael's The Changes deck, and then the other is the original Climer Cards deck. You can flip it over to see the number, shape, and color. I'll be real honest with y'all, it's not that helpful. It really was like a force, like the shapes and colors and stuff weren't really designed for this kind of context. So I almost always say that the facilitators can flip the card, but you could also set it up to allow the participants to flip the card either on the prompt page where you're asking the question or on the response page. So I'll leave that on just so you can see what it looks like. Okay, so that took me a minute to explain, but it's very fast when you already know what you're doing. So then you just activate the session. And then before the session can be used with a group, you have to type in a prompt. So it'll just look like this. You'll see there's nothing up there at the top. So you click these 3 little lines. I learned from the developer that the technical term for this is a hamburger menu. It's like, that's lovely. That's great. All right, so then you just click add first prompt, and then you have this option. Do you want this prefix or not? I'm going to leave it off. I'll show you the changes cards just so you can see a double-sided deck. So here's where you pick the decks. You can see there's all the emotion words. Also, I don't think I mentioned this yet, you can upload your own decks of cards. And so they would be here. Let's see. Let's do, what is an area? All right, what is an area you want to make change in your life? You're going to create the prompt. There's the deck of cards. You can show the QR code. You can hide it. Right here is where you'll copy that link. I'll just throw it in the chat if anyone wants to go to see it. This is the test link, I'll call it. And if you click on any of these, or you hover over it, you can flip the card deck. Or I could just click environment. I'm not sure. Well, I guess I could see a reason you would do it this way. Now, if this, like maybe you just want people to randomly pick and you don't want them to have a response, you can just tell them to like put a character, a period or something. And then here I can also flip the card and I can add another response here. So this is getting like multi-layered, maybe more than you'd want to do, but I can see, a certain group that would be helpful. I would recommend don't get into like the flipping card option with a group that's never used this before. I feel like it's just like extra directions you're giving people. Like I said, I almost never use that. All right, let me exit this session and show you a couple other little things. One of the things you can do is you can download a report of your responses. So I'm going to go back to the session we just had, or the one we just did. Actually, you can see here's all of mine. Actually, I can just hover over these 3 dots and I can create a PDF report. And I'll just show you what that looks like if you're curious. And here it is. So this is the description that I wrote, and then you can see everybody's responses here. I have found that clients love this, and it can be a really nice, post-session, and they can use it in all sorts of ways. Like at conferences, like for instance, I've used this as an MC at TEDx Asheville, and then after TEDx, they were used some of the responses in their social media. Um, yeah. So, and if you had multiple questions, then each prompt would have a different page or different, yeah. Um, okay, I'm gonna stop there as far as behind the scenes. Um, what questions do you have right now about Climer cards, either the physical text, the virtual deck, about metaphors? What are you thinking? Yeah, Sherry.
Um, Sorry, I was putting my microphone down. I'm thinking, it's more of a comment. I'm thinking this might have been a better solution than one um, visioning exercise that I did with a group where I had a little cumbersome process. We were online. I was trying to get them towards making their own metaphor for a visioning map that we were, the point
Mm-hmm.
was to develop the story and put it on some kind of metaphor map. And I wanted them to be able to generate what the metaphor was that would work for their group. And
Mm,
we circled the drain for so long, just trying to get everybody to pick one metaphor. I was realizing, after the fact, I was like, there had to have been a better way. So now I'm
yeah.
thinking perhaps if we'd started with a set of cards and everybody pick one, and then then we
Narrow
would
it
have had a
down.
starting point for the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, that it's true. It's like when you have too many options, it's not good.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. So I guess I am curious if you've ever worked with the cards in a way where you're trying to like where you're starting with everybody pick their own thing and have some sort of convergence.
yes, yeah, definitely you could do that. I think, like you said, when you have too many options and it's just like anything goes, it can be hard. But I think, yeah, I've done that where you can have everyone pick one card, and then now you have, 10 thoughts, and then people start sharing, and then, converging into one. Absolutely. Um, in some ways. And I think this goes back to what I was mentioning at the beginning, where, as a facilitator, you could have given them a metaphor, but that wouldn't have been near as powerful as, the process of them developing their own. And that conversation could be messy and, diverging and whatnot, but it can also make the metaphor really meaningful for them. So yeah, definitely you can use it in that way.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, good stuff. I appreciate that. Other thoughts? Brian's throwing in some more ideas in the chat on how
Yeah,
you
I
could.
do. I do a lot of strategic planning. I gotta let me just say this. So I have used not as good a tool. I won't mention it by name, but I did order these because I like them much better. They're just I find them like lighter physically. The ones that I've got are like this big, and it's like
Oh,
bringing a phone
yeah.
book around. But then besides that, it just brings a lightness to it that I think is
Yeah.
cool. Amy, let me kind of throw something at you, see what you do with
Here.
it. One of the things that I found when you're using images is to almost have people pick the image before you give them the prompt. To say something like, pick an image
Mm-hmm.
that you're drawn to, right? And then to back into it the explanation to say, all right, how does this image represent, for example, your leadership style, right?
Yeah.
And I find that especially if I'm working with a group that is tends to lean a little bit more on the side of inquiry and less on advocacy, like they want to discuss, they don't want to decide, that might be a way of getting them to actually like make a choice, a behavior that you can prime later. So what do you think about like maybe having
Mm.
them pick an image first?
Yes. Yeah, I've definitely done that. And I know a lot of facilitators who have done that as well. And it's interesting because a lot of participants will just be like, oh my gosh, this image is so perfect. Like, I picked the butterfly and I
Mm,
just never thought this would, it's like it's meant to be, they just get really into it. And sometimes it's a stretch. They're like, well, I didn't really know what to do at first, but here's what I figured out. And so it does make them, ponder and think. Yeah, and I also think, if you're using this multiple times, it's good to just mix it up sometimes. Like if you're, in fact, I don't recommend people use this a ton. It's like, okay, if you're leading a session like two, three times a day, or like if you're doing an hour session, maybe twice, like an opening and closing or something. But it's a great tool, and like any tool, you can overuse it. So
Mm.
don't use this every time you want them to talk because they'll get really fatigued by it. Um, yeah, so thank you, Brian. That was a great. A couple things before we officially close, and I'm happy to stick around if people want to talk more. But I do want to share a couple things with you. One is if you do want to test these out, they are free for 30 days. You can unsubscribe at any point, and that 30 days you get the full package. Oh, which reminds me of one other thing I need to tell you. But so you can sign up for 30 days, and then also all of you are invited if you're interested I have a Climer Cards user community on Facebook. I know Facebook may not be the best platform, but it's there. If you are on there and you want to join, you don't have to like make a purchase or anything, but it's just a group of about 300 or so facilitators and other good folks who are doing good work. So check that out if you're curious. And I think Brian, yeah, I put a link in the chat. One other thing I want to tell you that's important to know if you do want to get a subscription. Oops, let me fix this. There are two main choices. There's different plans that you can subscribe to. One is the basic plan, so it's less than $100 a year, $12 a month. You can, if you're like if you might sporadically use them, just sign up for a month and then cancel it and then come back later when you need them again. Um, and the big difference between these plans is the basic plan, you only get the original deck. But with the pro plan, you get every single thing we have available. So you get all the decks, you get all the features I mentioned, you can create reports, you can make your own decks. I literally one time made a deck for a conference that I was emceeing where I didn't want them to pick a card. I just wanted to see their responses on the screen. And so I had one card, which was the logo for the conference. And I just said, click on this link and click on this logo and then respond to this question, whatever it was. And then all the responses were up on the screen really quickly. It was actually it worked really well. So there's all sorts of ways you can use this if you want to upload your own deck. You can get pretty creative there. So anyway, I just want to make sure you knew about the differences between the plans. All right, last thing, we're going to go back into the Climer Cards app. If you still have it open, you can just go back to that screen. You might need to refresh it, but I want you to share how are you feeling about using Climer Cards in a future session, whether it's a workshop or training or coaching or whatever you do. And Brian, can you put that link back in the chat for
Sure. I think it says, please wait for the facilitator. I don't know if that's correct.
uh
Let me try
you
it again.
oh, you know what? Oh, that shouldn't be. Maybe try refreshing.
Yeah, I kind of did, but that's all right.
Oh, you kind of did. Okay. Huh. And you're in the one that says Nova 2026?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Hmm, not good. I don't know.
We like to go into
Yeah.
these things with an attitude of wonder.
Right. Like, why isn't this working?
It's working for me now.
It is
It is?
okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe just take a second. I'm not going to exit the session then.
Yeah.
I just clicked that most recent link that you put in, Brian.
Well, that must have done it.
Huh. Yeah, it should have been the same link, but.
Oh, there we are. Okay.
Okay, cool. Perfect. Yeah, so take a moment, if you will, and pick a card that represents, yeah, how are you feeling right now? What are you feeling of how to use Climer cards in a future session?
Oh, I'm noticing a theme.
Oh my gosh, this is hilarious. Awesome. I love it. Creative, 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 delighted, excited. Ruby, you're so great. Um, awesome. I'm glad y'all are feeling so good about using them. All right, I'm going to stick around if you have more questions you want to ask. I'm happy to hang out, but I just want to say thank you. Have fun facilitating awesome meetings and doing awesome work. I know you already are. Thanks so much for being here tonight.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Before I do that, let's give Dr. Amy a big NovaScribes. Thank you very much. Amy, it's great to have you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.